and used as sexual slaves. They're stuck on these plantations. They've got, in some cases, plantation housing. And you can't really call it housing because it's an exoskeleton, a basic, structure. If they have a structure at all, they're supposedly getting, according to the company, they get health care and they get schools and they get education. And you see this with WWF, the World Wildlife Fund, and you see it with the conservation organizations in general going in and creating these conservation reserves today in Congo. And you see it with the logging companies, and you see it with the plantations. They say they're giving health care, schools, they give a good wage, which is not true, and sometimes they say they give transport, they give insurance. This is just lies through the teeth. Over and over, Greenpeace just produced a report about the logging of some of these logging companies, and that's exactly the same story that I've been working on. And with the plantations, it's the same thing. They say they're giving schools. You look at the school, you can't call it a school. There's never any books. They might have the Bible, but that's the only thing. And that brings up the issue of Christian or evangelical religious organizations from the United States, sometimes linked to the CIA, which have been operating in the Congo. So there's all of these different facets that are not at all being brought out in any sense of the word in the American press. And you can connect, these most powerful people to the American press anyway. So that's part of the problem.
Keith, when you use the word plantation, are you referring to something that's like a corporate-run entity that enslaves people?
Yeah, you'd have to say it's a corporation. It has incorporated itself as a business in the Congo. For example, this Busira Lumami, that's the name of the company. That's the name of the place. Busira was one section of this plantation, and Lumami was another one, and that's why we went down the Lumami River. And Busira Lumami was a plantation that was started, I think, I'm not sure of the numbers, it was either 1913 or 1922 or 1923 by the Belgians, soon after King Leopold. Of course, King Leopold had to give up his private fiefdom in the Congo to the Belgian government in 1909 or 1910. So we're basically talking about the same system of exploitation that was set up under the Belgian colonial enterprise. Massive infrastructure was put in from 1909 to 1959 when the Belgians turned the Congo over to the Congolese people, fighting tooth and nail and making sure all along the way that the Congolese people would not benefit from anything in their own country, meaning during the enterprise of colonialism as well as after, when they so-called declared independence. So you can go into these plantations and see these old buildings that used to be universities institutes. There's this one riding through the rainforest. Suddenly, this is south of Kisangani, came to this huge, massive building that was probably 60, 70, 80 years old, or even more, and it used to be an institute for some sort of a botanical studies where they would do the research on the plants for palm oil, for example, the palm oil plants. And it's completely abandoned now. And that's because the Belgians split. The system saw a reorganization under Mobutu that meant that a lot of the Belgian power structure left. But many of these plantations continued to operate, and they did so with complete untransparency, the opposite of transparency. So Busira Lumami, from 1959, which was independence, to today, they've continued to operate without giving the people anything at all. And under Mobutu, nobody went in. As far as I can see, if you search the American media, there's no stories about the plantations during the Mobutu era, 1980s, 1990s. Look at the New York Times. There isn't a single story from the American press that connects these plantation owners from the United States, powerful Israeli Zionist connections in the United States, or French people or Belgian people in Europe that are running these plantations. You don't find anything like that. Instead, you find these racist stories about how Congo is just falling apart under Mobutu. But everything that existed under Mobutu, which was massive business for the United States, not deconstruction and deterioration, it was a massive business for the United States, still exists in Congo today. Some of it was destroyed during the war, but some of the very same people who profited significantly under Mobutu are profiting today. And in fact, they've gotten themselves elected because they had so much money to do so in what became known as the first free and independent elections in the Congo, which occurred in August of last year. Anybody who dares to open their mouth on one of these plantations will first be fired. And depending on the extent to which they have the audacity to open their mouth, they will be killed. And the average lifespan for people on these plantations might be 40 years old. They're dealing with diseases that they shouldn't be dealing with at all in this era, 2007. Massive epidemics of tuberculosis, malaria. AIDS isn't the number one killer in Congo. What these people are dealing with in the Congo, and it's the same in most of Africa, AIDS is not the killer. AIDS in the United States in media is a big propaganda campaign run by and for powerful interests that stand to benefit from, in one way or another, the manipulation of the public mind in the United States about this thing they call AIDS in Africa. The number one killer in Africa is malaria. Number two is tuberculosis. Number three is diarrhea. I mean, 4, 5, and 6 are malnutrition and river blindness and schistosomiasis, this other one that comes from this parasite that drills into your blood system and eventually drills holes in your heart. These are the killers on these plantations. And I've got World Health Organization doctors from the Congo who went onto the plantations and found that the conditions, the health conditions on the plantations are worse than the health conditions where there's no plantation. They're worse than the health conditions where there's no logging. And of course the company's argument is, and this is the New York Times argument, the New York Times is currently running this propaganda argument about how we need to bring development to the Congo, and it's by this guy Nicholas Kristof, and his whole argument is the only thing worse than exploitation is no exploitation, saying that the people suffering in these areas where there's no capitalism, where there's no corporations, are worse off than people who are being exploited where there are corporations. And this is absolutely not true. First of all, the corporations are there. The plantations are there. The mining companies, the diamonds, the coltan, the oil, they're there in Congo. You don't see them because the American press excludes that. We don't want people to understand that there is something called development in Congo. You know, Congo in 1959 had a higher standard of living than Portugal. It was on a par with South Africa. This isn't shown by the American press. Instead, we get these, as the Newsweek put it during the war, tribal people walking backwards into battle wearing bathroom fixtures on their head. Drugged. This is nonsense. It's racist. It's white supremacy. On the plantations, the people are dealing with epidemics of tuberculosis, and they're dealing with malaria, and they're dealing with other epidemics. And the bottom line is, it's exploitation of labor. There's an infinite number of people, respectively, there's an infinite number of people to be working. As long as you keep the people absolutely desperate, poor, in a state of military control, you can keep the salaries at a bare minimum. You don't have to give them housing. You don't have to build their school that you've supposedly promised them. You don't have to do any of that. On the plantations run by the Blattner family, in Busiro-Limami, for example, if anyone opens their mouth, they'll be fired. If they take it to the next level and they try to protest, they'll be arrested. They'll be taken to jail. They'll be put in jail. They'll be carried upriver to Kisangani and put in jail in Kisangani. If the family wants to get the person out, the village will try to raise enough money to try to bribe the officials to let the man go. And it's almost always a man that's been arrested. They don't arrest the women. They just take them as sexual slaves or mistreat them. Don't keep them, but mistreat them sexually. So the men are arrested. The villages couldn't be poorer. I mean, they couldn't be poorer. And they try to raise some money one way or another to get this person who's part of the village, part of the community, out of the prison. And they do that. And the amount of money that they raise isn't anything close to the kind of money that these companies are making on these products. And the company in Busiro-Limami, for example, they will pay the local police or the local military to arrest people who have stolen some of the products that they're producing. For example, palm nuts. Palm nuts are used for palm oil for this company, Busiro-Limami, this Blattner company. And the soldiers during the war would actually, and the police would actually go into the people's houses, the people who lived on the plantation, and under the claim that they have to search to make sure that no palm nuts have been stolen, and they would take whatever they wanted. And the people don't have anything, and I can show you, people will eventually see some pictures of this. The soldiers would go in, they'd claim they're checking to make sure there's no theft of the company's palm oil, palm nuts, and then they would take whatever they wanted. And now it's not quite that bad, but it's still serious. The police today are paid 2,000 Congolese francs for every person that they arrest for stealing palm nuts. Now, 2,000 Congolese francs is $4. But they're paid $4 for every person that they arrest. So there's an incentive to arrest people. And I told you the salary for people who